The hillside shakes with the roar of 50,000 voices. At the center, Gallic warriors raise a grim trophy, the severed head of a Roman consul. To them, it is the sound of victory, a sign that Rome's destiny is sealed. But history rarely follows such certainty. In the next 20 minutes, you'll see how that loud celebration became the crack in their defenses, the beginning of the end for Gallic dominance in northern Italy. You'll also meet the Roman general who turned their triumph into disaster. Welcome to Great History, your daily history channel where we share remarkable stories of ancient warfare. We're honored to be part of a growing community of history enthusiasts. If you're as passionate about history as we are, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. Let's turn back more than 2,000 years to a day that left Rome shaken, the Battle of the Allia. Every Roman knew the tale. It was etched into memory like a scar that never healed. In 390 BC, the Gauls descended from the north, wild-haired painted, their battle cries echoing through the hills. Under the summer sun, beside a narrow river, the Roman line began to collapse. At first it was only a ripple, one cohort faltering, a few men slipping away. Then panic spread like fire. Shields crashed to the ground, spears abandoned in the mud until the army broke completely. Soldiers fled for the city. Many didn't make it. The Gauls pushed forward relentlessly into Rome. Temples burned. The homes of senators and merchants were stripped bare. Families escaped with nothing more than a child in one arm and a bundle of food in the other. The proud city that had stood for centuries suddenly looked no stronger than a village of mud huts. A handful of defenders took refuge on the Capitoline Hill, powerless as flames consumed the forum below. By morning, Rome looked finished before its story had truly begun. The once mighty city stood hollow, its walls blackened with smoke, its wealth loaded into Gallic wagons. Rome's survival came not from strength but from fortune, a humiliating ransom of gold that persuaded the Gauls to withdraw. It was the price of failure, and its memory endured. Fathers told sons and sons told grandsons about the day when Gauls stood at Rome's gates and the city could only tremble. That memory never faded. It haunted every Senate debate and every military council. The Gauls were not just an enemy. They were the living reminder of Rome's most fragile moment, a warning that even the eternal city could fall if its people faltered. 2 centuries later, that fear still carried weight. Every rumor of Celtic warbands on the move, every merchant caravan claiming to have seen painted warriors across the Alps, put Rome on edge. Rome had defeated Carthage, endured the Samnites, and resisted the Etruscans. Yet the thought of another Celtic horde flooding into northern Italy sent a distinct chill through the Republic. So who were these people, the Celts who haunted Roman memory? They were not a single nation with kings and borders like Rome. Instead, they were a collection of tribes, scattered but formidable. The Boii established themselves in the Po Valley. The Insubres held strongholds around Mediolanum, and the Geissatai, wild mercenaries who sold their swords to the highest bidder, were especially notorious. The Geissatai left a lasting mark. They often fought nearly unclothed, decorated only with tattoos, amulets, and sheer boldness. To Romans, they seemed less like soldiers and more like war spirits, men too fearless or too reckless to guard their own bodies. Their reasons for moving south unsettled Romans as well. Some came in search of plunder, silver goblets, jeweled brooches, bronze statues, all melted into wealth. Roman writers recalled wagons heavy with spoils creaking back across the Alps. Others traveled with their families seeking fertile land. Compared to Gaul's rocky hills and poor soil, northern Italy was paradise. Green valleys watered by rivers, land that could sustain generations. Yet above all, it was tradition. Crossing into Italy was more than a campaign, it was heritage, passed from father to son. Celtic boys grew up hearing of ancestors who once humbled mighty Rome, of the gold ransom paid beneath the mocking gaze of Brennus. To raid Italy was more than opportunity. It was a rite of passage, a chance to test Roman strength, to leave one's mark in the land of vineyards and walled towns. Where Romans saw barbarism, the Celts saw legacy. By the 3rd century BC, however, Rome had risen beyond its old humiliation. No longer a fragile city-state, it had become a growing power. The First Punic War against Carthage had been long and grueling, lasting over 20 years. But Rome emerged stronger, victorious both on land and sea, an achievement no Italian state had ever imagined. Their fleets now sailed waters once dominated by Carthaginian triremes. Their legions, hardened and scarred by years of sieges and battles, stood as seasoned veterans. Yet despite their victories in the south and across the seas, the north remained unsettled, a wound that refused to close. The fertile valleys of the Po were rich and promising, but also restless and dangerous. This was the frontier where Rome's confidence clashed with Celtic ambition. Each year brought new whispers, gathering warriors, mercenaries flooding into Italy, tribes rallying under daring leaders. For Rome, the north represented both opportunity and danger. What value was victory in Sicily or Sardinia if the gates of Italy itself stood exposed? The Boii and the Insubres understood this clearly, and fear gnawed at them. They had watched Rome expand step by step, consuming rivals until none remained untouched. They knew their turn was coming. Rather than wait, they chose to strike first to alter the pattern. This was not a mere raid for loot. It was a calculated strategy. Deliver one decisive blow, shake Rome's confidence, force her to hesitate, and remind her who still held strength. So, the Celts descended into Etruria. Not as raiders, but as something far greater, almost an entire people on the move. Wagons groaned under treasures already seized. Silver goblets, bronze statues, wealth ripped from unlucky Italian towns. Yet it was not only warriors who advanced. Families marched as well. Children stumbling along dusty roads, women urging oxen forward beneath the summer sun. The army dragged on, slowed by the burden of its own success. And with every mile deeper into Italy, the column grew more exposed, vulnerable to Roman forces already maneuvering to intercept them. Into this volatile setting stepped two Roman consuls, the annual pillars of the Republic's leadership. Every year the people elected them, and every year these men carried not only command but rivalry. Rome's system allowed no single general to rise too high. Power was always divided. In theory, they were partners. In practice, they were competitors, each striving for the laurels that would bring lasting honor to their family name. Lucius Aemilius Papus was the steadier of the two. Years of relentless campaigning across Italy had forged caution and discipline into him. He was the type to measure twice before striking once, preferring to let impulsive opponents exhaust themselves against his patience. His soldiers respected him, not with affection but with quiet trust. They knew he would never squander their lives recklessly. Beside him, though not always in harmony, stood Gaius Atilius Regulus. Younger, bolder, still fueled by the pride of his recent Sardinian campaign, he believed speed and daring could win the day. Where Papus was deliberate, Regulus was impulsive, embodying the restless ambition of Roman politics, where each consul had only a single year to prove himself. Time was short, and glory had to be seized before it slipped away. For Regulus, survival was not enough. He wanted a triumph, a parade through Rome with his name carved into history. This was the paradox of Rome's system. Equal authority meant equal risk. Two commanders could form a powerful double-edged sword in the Republic's hand, or they could cut against each other, just when unity was needed most. Could Papus's discipline and Regulus's ambition merge into decisive strength, or would pride fracture their unity, leaving Rome open to another defeat, another fire at the gates? The test came quickly. From the south, Papus blocked the road. From the north, almost as if fate itself had closed its jaws, Regulus appeared with his seasoned Sardinian troops. The Celts suddenly saw themselves not as an army marching forward but as prey trapped in a Roman snare. Ahead, Papus sealed the path. Behind, Regulus closed in, and unlike a raiding band, they could not simply vanish into the forests. Their wagons overflowed with loot, their families stretched along the march. Escape was impossible, so they turned to fight. Chiefs shouted commands. Warriors slammed spear butts against shields, and with grim resolve they divided their force in two. One line faced Papus, the other wheeled against Regulus. It was a desperate gamble. Survival meant breaking one Roman army before the other could strike. The air hung heavy with a single question: who would act first? Regulus gave the answer. Bold and impatient, he drove his cavalry toward a ridge commanding the field. Whoever held it would control the battle. Hooves thundered, iron shoes struck the ground, dust rose, and the silence shattered in an instant. Horses crashed, blades clashed, shields splintered. Combat pressed so close that men heard each other's breath and curses. In that chaos, Gaius Atilius Regulus, consul of Rome, fell. For a moment the field froze. One of the Republic's two supreme magistrates lay dead at the first collision, struck down before the eyes of both armies. The Celts seized the moment. They did not just kill a commander, they destroyed a symbol. They severed his head, raised it aloft, and let blood run down the spear's shaft. Paraded across their ranks, it became more than a grisly trophy. To them, it was divine proof that Rome could be broken, that even its greatest leaders were mortal. Their voices swelled with each sight of it, cheers rising until the hills seemed to echo with their triumph. But for the Romans, imagine the sight, standing in formation, shield in hand, watching your consul's head carried high by the enemy. A consul was not only a general, he embodied the Republic, the centuries of law and tradition, the promise that Rome stood beside every soldier. To see that symbol destroyed so swiftly, displayed as a mere spoil of war, must have shaken the very core of the legions. Was this the first crack in Rome's armor? The moment when discipline might give way to fear? When the shadow of Alia, a nightmare from a century before when the Celts sacked and burned Rome, seemed to rise again, it haunted every Roman soldier in the line. Would Telamon become another humiliation, another lasting scar etched into Rome's memory? High on a ridge, Lucius Aemilius Papus remained still. Upright on his horse, his expression unreadable, he looked like a statue amidst the chaos. To the legionaries below, straining under the thunder of Celtic celebration, it may have appeared like hesitation. To the Celts, it could even have been mistaken for weakness. Romans frozen, leaderless, overcome with fear. But Papus was no novice. He knew battles could turn in an instant, that armies could break when commanders charged recklessly into disaster. He understood that if he acted too soon, chasing glory like his fallen colleague, the Roman line might collapse entirely. So what was he waiting for? He was waiting for the precise moment, the alignment where his army could strike as one, every sword and shield moving like parts of a single machine. Rome's power lay not in reckless charges or individual heroics, but in discipline, in the iron bond holding the legion together. Finally, Papus gave the signal. The horn's blast cut through the noise. Rank after rank of Roman infantry lowered their spears, locked shields, and advanced in steady, unyielding rhythm. It was not showy or wild. It was relentless, an iron wall pressing forward shoulder to shoulder, and there was more. On Papus's command, the cavalry split wide, circling around the enemy's flanks rather than plunging into the center. The ground thundered beneath hooves as the arc widened, a steel tide sweeping around the battlefield. Like jaws closing, the cavalry sought not to break the front but to seal every escape. Papus was preparing Rome's hallmark tactic, the hammer and the anvil, one force holding the enemy in place while the other struck from behind. Then came the Gaesatai. These were mercenary shock troops, warriors who wielded terror itself as a weapon. They charged without armor, their bodies bare except for tattoos, charms, and round shields. To the Celts, fighting naked displayed fearlessness and contempt for death, proof of divine favor. They surged forward, shrieking, pale bodies glistening with sweat and blood in the sun. Imagine standing in the Roman line and seeing that storm of naked fury racing at you. It was designed to unnerve even hardened veterans. For a breathless moment, the legion wavered internally, fear against discipline. But Rome was built on discipline. Shields locked, lines held. The command rang out and a volley of javelins darkened the sky. The first wave of Gaesatai fell in heaps, skewered mid-charge. Those who reached the line smashed against a wall of shields, their wild strikes bouncing off iron and bronze. What they thought would inspire dread became their downfall. Rage shattered against Rome's machine. Meanwhile, the larger Celtic host faced disaster. On one side, they struggled against Papus's advancing legions. On the other, they confronted the battered yet unbroken forces of Regulus, now hardened by the shock of their consul's death and driven by his officers. The Celts fought with ferocity, but with every heartbeat Rome's grip tightened. The jaws of the trap closed. The hunters became the hunted, penned in with nowhere to flee. What began as a test of strength became a massacre. This was the pivot, the turning point. The hammer met the anvil and the Celtic host was broken. The trap snapped shut. Their line crumbled, then fractured, then dissolved into panic. Warriors dropped weapons, cast away shields, and fled, but there was no escape. Every road was sealed by Roman ranks. Each hill rose like a barrier of ordered steel. Cavalry charged through the fleeing masses, hooves smashing bodies and wagons alike. Those wagons weren't empty. They carried families, children stumbling in the dust, women gripping oxen. pulled helplessly into the wave of panic. The air filled with cries, a mix of clashing weapons, terrified screams, and the last gasps of fallen fighters. The spoils they carried, silver, bronze, treasures from plundered towns, spilled into the dirt, glittering mockingly under the sun. Even the fearless mercenaries, the Gizate, who fought unclothed to unnerve the Romans, were broken apart. Bodies scattered, some pierced by spears, others crushed beneath the steady Roman advance. At the center stood Breno, not the legendary Brennus of old, but a man of flesh and blood holding a spear and his people's pride. Encircled by corpses and the relentless stamp of Roman boots, he made his only choice, dropping to the ground, feigning death, lying motionless among the fallen as the slaughter rolled past. Survival now meant appearing lifeless, so close you could smell the iron in the air. When silence returned, the cost was devastating. Tens of thousands of Celts lay dead across the hills and valleys of Telamon. Their leaders, once proud enough to dream of challenging Rome, were dragged away in chains, their fate sealed. What began as a bold display of strength ended in absolute collapse. Cisalpine Gaul, that constant thorn on Rome's frontier, was shattered. Its power crushed, its towns and strongholds either captured or destroyed. The path to Roman control of northern Italy now lay wide open, with consequences reaching far beyond the battlefield. With Telamon, the great Celtic threat in Italy was eliminated. Never again would war bands storm from the Po Valley, expecting Rome to hesitate. Rome had not just claimed victory, it had secured its northern border and broadcasted a clear warning to allies and enemies alike. The Republic would not and could not be broken. The shame of past defeats, the ghost of the Aelia, had finally been driven away. From this day forward, it was the Celts who had cause to tremble. For Rome, the victory carried symbolic weight. The nightmare of the sack a century earlier, when Celts burned the city itself, was finally erased. Telamon became proof of Rome's system, politics and armies moving as one, discipline overpowering raw courage. It revealed Rome's ability to trap even the fiercest enemy, to withstand ferocity with order and break it apart without losing composure. The victory was not only military but strategic. By crushing the power of the Boii in Subris and Gisate, Rome neutralized the Celtic presence in northern Italy, unlocked the Po Valley for expansion, and sent a decisive message. Rome was relentless, organized, and impossible to intimidate. It proved that Rome's strength rested not only on bravery, but on planning, structure, and the unique capacity to turn danger into opportunity. And here lies the lasting shift. After Telamon, it wasn't Rome fearing Celtic warbands, it was the Celts who feared Rome. Northern Italy would no longer serve as a safe route for raids. Yet only decades later, the old tensions would ignite again, this time in a way that would reshape Italy forever. The Celts were not finished, and Rome would not forget. Their paths would cross again, in the presence of new rivals, new strategies, and a commander whose name would alter history itself. Hannibal. But before reaching that moment, pause and reflect on Telamon. Which scene struck you most? Was it the clash of steel, the cries of the Gaisati, or the instant when Regulus fell? Share your thoughts below. They guide the stories we bring to life. And if you've been following this journey through history, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. More battles, more strategy, and more of the human story that gives history its voice a weight. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.